Order. Thank you everyone for being here today. So first up, we're going to have an approval of the minutes from May 10, 2022. Councillor Harris, Councillor McKenzie, on the question, all in favor? Great, thank you. And all right, now you're going to need item 1.2, approval of the minutes. Councillor Harris, did you have an amendment you'd like to make to the agenda?
No, we have.
Oh, sorry, that's a minute. Sorry, excuse me. So Councillor Harris and Deputy McKenzie on the question. All those in favor? Aye, great. Okay, now the approval of the agenda for today. Councillor Harris.
Chair, I'm just waiting there on my mic. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just looking to get 5.4 and 5.5 moved up to 5.1 and 5.2 respectively, just to move the affordable housing discussion just to the top of the list. I know we have some people who are in room wanting to talk about it, so it would be good to get that out of the way soon. And I also have a commitment at 2 that I want to try to make sure I'm here for that conversation if the rest of committee is amenable to that.
Okay, great. So seconded by Deputy Mayor and all in favor? Okay, the agenda has been changed. So we're going to start now with our presenter, excuse me, everybody. We're going to start with the draft Affordable Housing Action Plan, and we're going to start with Director Phil Ouellette.
Thank you, Chair Killen. After over a year of meetings, research, planning, and deliberations, I'm pleased to be before the Growth Committee today to share the initial draft of the Affordable Housing Action Plan. I must start by acknowledging that we do have a housing crisis in St. John, which resulted in Council making this a central priority within its 2021-2026 mandate. The scale and impact of the crisis was confirmed through the interactions we had with residents and community partners over the past months. Staff are confident in the process that led us to where we are here today, with a plan that seeks to capture the major challenges we face with affordable housing in St. John and offers tangible actions to respond. This confidence stems from the guidance and experience of the consultants, a passionate and determined action team, input from the community of partners and stakeholders, an internal municipal coordination team, many residents who offered input, and a handful of drafts we worked through over the past weeks and months. This confidence supports our decision that the draft plan is now ready for Growth Committee and ready to be released to the public. It is this committee, Growth Committee, who will have the role of determining whether this plan strikes the right balance and characterizes the will of Council on this important issue. This committee's engagement on this draft plan is a central step in moving to a final draft and ultimately a recommendation to Council and a vote before Council. So I'm going to play the role of MC a little bit here today. There'll be 3 different presentations. So I'm going to start with Randy Hatfield, and I'm going to give a quick intro to Randy. I do want to point out how fortunate we are to have Human Development Council in St. John. We're very lucky to house that organization. This organization contributes to St. John in so many ways, including supporting around the block, regular research, poverty reduction on living wage, ward profiles, homelessness, amongst so much more. For over 20 years, Randy has led the Human Development Council, which has helped this community understand and respond to the major social challenges it faces. I first met Randy when I started with the city in 2012, and I can attest that his work and his team's work has contributed to countless initiatives, studies, programs, and actions undertaken by the city from their work. Randy is one of the 8 community partners involved in the Affordable Housing Action Team, and he was identified by the group to speak on its behalf before Growth Committee here today. So I'll ask Mr. Hatfield to come on up.
No, it's red. That's a warning. Thank you, Phil, Councillor Killen, members of the Growth Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this afternoon as we talk about a step on the path to ensuring that in this community there is an adequate stock of available and affordable housing. The task force met over the last year on a number of occasions, reviewing the consultants' initial drafts and making recommendations to reflect local circumstances. The meetings were respectful and collegial, and I think learning opportunities for For any consultant that comes into the city, there are a huge number of issues in history to take into account to bring them up to speed so they can adequately address the circumstances that we're confronted with. I think they captured the sense of urgency that was communicated to them. When you read the document, I think we find language that indicates that we do in fact have an affordability crisis. We are leaving people behind. Low and moderate income people are finding a daily struggle now to keep what they have or to find what they need. So clearly this is an important move forward. Extensive consultations with key informants and the public were undertaken, and they are outlined in the report. I'll be brief today. Of the 39 recommendations, there are several that I think stand out. The report recommends that the city take an active and meaningful role in the provision of affordable housing. It challenges the post-equal opportunity mantra that the province has responsibility for services to people and the city has responsibilities for people to property. For property rather. And I think that clearly blurs. And I think what we are seeing, commensurate with the activities in Fredericton and in Moncton and in Newfoundland and in Halifax and throughout the country, in fact, we are seeing local governments become more active and more engaged in a file that traditionally was looked upon as a senior level responsibility. The report also calls for an initial investment of $800,000. I always like to follow the money when I look at consultants' reports because I think that's where you find action. That's where you find commitment, and that's where there is an ability to actually start moving this file forward. So not only the fund that's established, but the creation of a full-time position within the city to quarterback and to oversee this. In a small community, we can't underestimate the impact that one individual can have, and how embedded within the city, aligned with the planning department, available to the technology and to the data that's here in the city, I think it is a progressive first step. The strategy will be data-driven with a monitoring framework tracking key housing indicators and the creation of a housing advisory committee. The report also acknowledges correctly the critical role of the nonprofit developer community. It targets the fund to non-market housing on a priority basis and recommends that a municipal land disposition policy offer preferred or first access to affordable housing projects. And I think that's taking advantage of the tools that exist within local government, using its provisions under the Local Governance Act, with its municipal plan, with its neighborhood plans, with its zoning bylaw, to make the changes in the tinkering that's necessary to facilitate the creation of an affordable housing stock. The report significantly defines affordability using the well-worn Cmhc core housing need definition of 30% of a person's income is thought to be a maximum. But critically, and I think importantly, it also adds to the definition of affordability that the rental cost should be no greater than the 30th income percentile for the community. And what this is meant to do is to target energy and focus, to acknowledge that low and moderate income St. Johners, the working poor in this community, are running out of options. They are desperate. For elected officials and others that canvass community attitudes and mood, you've seen it, you know it. And to acknowledge that and to put steps in place that move us toward addressing the needs of working poor in this community is first class. It's long overdue. Finally, the report acknowledges the need to coordinate planning and policy efforts in the metropolitan area. With the introduction of regional services commissions with the authority to work on housing issues, it will be important to avoid a patchwork quilt approach to development, and inclusionary zoning, for instance, comes to mind. Unless the municipal entities within the metropolitan area that will compose the entities of the new Regional Services Commission align some of their definition of interests, we'll be playing one community off against another. And we've seen historically over the years, pre-equal opportunity with 15 counties, 2 on the verge of bankruptcy, corporate interests playing one off against the other for more favorable tax treatment. I mean, we've got to make sure that as we approach this new development in this province, that we have the capacity to engage and work with our neighboring suburban municipalities to make sure that we have a consistent and aligned approach to the provision of affordable housing. We look forward to community feedback for the report, and I would repeat, this is an important step along the path. Thank you.
Thank you. Back over to Phil.
Thank you, Randy, for that introduction, and thank you for agreeing to speak on behalf of the action team. The next presenter will be Andy Reid. Andy Reid has been a planner with the city since 2016. Among many of his professional accomplishments, you may recall that he was the planner that presented the secondary plan for the Central Peninsula. So he has some background in managing some large, complex projects. Andy is the lead for the Affordable Housing Action Plan, and I will take this opportunity to thank him for his commitment and passion to this project so far, and the skillful balance that's required to manage all the different intricacies of the project. He's here to offer a couple comments before we present to our consultants.
Thank you, Director Ouellette. I just wanted to give an idea on what we had envisioned for the next month during this period where we've opened the draft now to the public. So we will be holding 2 virtual sessions to engage our list of stakeholders who we'd previously engaged during the development of the plan. The plan will be available on the Shape Your City website. We'll have a comment feature there. And also just wanted to mention that staff were really willing and we want to meet with anyone who has comments or feedbacks on the draft. We're joined here today by members of the action team. So thanks, Kit, Randy, and Jody for being here. And the vision behind the plan really is a community plan. And it's just been such an honor and pleasure to work with the members of the action team, the stakeholders in our community and the consultants. So we're looking forward to your feedback and for coming back to Growth Committee in September. At that point, we will have a resourcing plan for the draft plan, as well as communications behind it worked out. And just also wanted to pass along a thanks to our consultants, Ken Folds and Ed Starr in advance. They'll be the next up. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I'll ask the clerk's office to ensure that the visuals are up for those that are joining us virtually. I would like to introduce Ed Starr and Ken Folds. Ken will be doing the primary presentation, but Ed is also online. Ed Starr is one of the 2 founding partners of SHS Consulting. He possesses over 40 years of professional experience in affordable housing and in the homelessness sector. Ed has directed dozens of comprehensive housing strategies and hundreds of complex consulting assignments for various governments, municipalities, and other organizations. Ken Folds is a principal with Refact Consulting located in Ontario and has worked professionally in the housing and planning development field for over 30 years. Since establishing the consulting firm in 2006, Ken has continued to lead and support the development of housing policies, programs, and initiatives for municipalities, organizations, and housing providers throughout Canada. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Ken. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Phil. And very happy to be here today with the committee. Again, it's been a few months since we've been here. I'll just load up our PowerPoint deck so that we can start screen sharing that. As committee might remember, we were here a few months ago talking primarily about the needs assessment, one of the first and important foundational pieces for this particular piece of work. We'll touch on that very briefly today. Our focus will be, however, about the overall plan itself. As Phil mentioned, Ed Starr is also online today, and we'll both be looking forward to responding to questions that the group might have after we've finished our presentation. We'll just finish getting loaded up here. So, in terms of the Affordable Action Plan, I think one of the important things, and it's been underscored here today, is the importance of having this plan. And I think it's important to understand what the plan is and what it does. I think most importantly, the plan is set out to provide a clear and concise action plan for the next 5 years. It's really targeted to that 5-year window.
Ken, it's Phil here. We're just we see you, but you have not successfully loaded the presentation yet. So what we're seeing is just an image of the drop down of options.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see that now, Phil?
Ken, what we've done is we've uploaded it on our end through our city clerk, so we have it. So what if you can do is if you can follow along your own, we don't need to see your image. We've loaded our own, and just say next slide when you're ready to go. So we're starting on the cover page that just says the City of St. John Housing Needs Assessment and Affordable Housing Action Plan. So just to let us know, change slide, and then we'll do that for you.
Okay, sorry about that, Phil. I'm not sure what the issue is there. I'll just stop sharing the screen and they'll follow on the public feed. So in terms of the first slide, I believe we're on the Affordable Housing Action Plan, why develop a plan.
Yes, we're there. Go ahead. We are there. Go ahead.
Hi there, it's Phil. May I ask who's calling in? Is that Ed or Ken?
It's Ed. I think Ken is trying to rejoin through the video.
Okay. If he has difficulties, it'd be my suggestion for him to join via phone, similar to you, Ed, and that would just prevent the likelihood of this happening again. We'll see how it goes.
I apologize for this.
No worries. So Ed, I see that you've joined twice with your phone and your video, so just make sure you don't turn both microphones on if that's the case.
Right.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Ed, we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm wondering, in Ken's absence, maybe I could carry on with the presentation. I'm quite familiar with it.
Ed, that sounds fine with us, and if Ken is able to rejoin, he can jump in at that time. Oh, he might have beat us to the punch.
Oh, here he comes.
Hi, Ken, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So we have the presentation up. We have you and Ed now, and just say next slide when you like to, and we'll proceed like that.
All right. Apologies for that, Phil. I'm not sure. We haven't had any issues before, so it's a bit frustrating, but anyway. All right. So in terms of where we left off, we were talking about the Affordable Housing Action Plan and the importance of the plan. As mentioned, what we were tasked with was designing a plan that was comprehensive and targeted and really aimed at actioning ideas over the next 5-year period. It's really important, as you heard Randy underscore, given the need in the community. What's also important is that as a plan, it helps trying to coordinate the resources and the entities that are out there. And obviously, in terms of addressing those needs, marshaling the resources and focusing them in the areas that require it. And that's really the intent of the plan. We've seen some shifting trends locally, as was identified in the needs assessment report. And those trends are continuing to change, by the way. I think everyone's seen some of the recent changes that are happening, the dynamics in the marketplace. Certainly the raising of the prime interest rates by the Bank of Canada last week to the tune of 1 full percentage point is going to have some ripples in the housing market. So there are things that are occurring as we move forward. I think the other important piece is that the plan really fills a gap in the local policy infrastructure. So while you have some great policies within the municipal plan itself, and some of the other documentation, the zoning bylaws, etc., there's opportunities to sort of address those gaps in the face of the environmental changes that are happening. Next slide, please. In terms of how the plan was developed, I think committee's quite aware of the steps that were taken. It was really divided into 2 main pieces. The first part was really around designing the housing needs assessment, understanding the local market, both the supply, demand, and affordability factors that exist out there, some of the other pressures that come to bear, and the context in which that work is done. We also had a component of neighborhood mapping that we completed as part of that. The second part involved a fairly comprehensive stakeholder engagement and public survey strategy to really test the propositions of what people were seeing in the community, given the fact that the facts and figures don't always tell the whole story in terms of what the housing picture is locally. Then also looked at, from that work, developing a responsive policy framework and an action plan that would really act on the priorities emerging from those, what we heard both through the community stakeholders and through the needs assessment piece. And then finally, we included an implementation strategy as part of that. And I think, as Randy had underscored and as Phil has mentioned, we were really thankful for the composition of the action team, which provided some very valuable feedback. They represent a wide cross-section of very engaged stakeholders in your community and are going to have carriage of the plan moving forward. On the next slide, we document just again some information about the whole stakeholder engagement process, the two particular pieces, and you can see here that by conducting focus groups, town hall sessions, interviews, workshops, we really did cover the waterfront in terms of the array of stakeholders that were documented, and you'll see in Appendix 2 of the plan a listing of those different agencies and organizations that were participated in the process. The last two pieces there were around the questionnaires to those who are most vulnerable in the community. We worked through the community or the neighborhood developer organizations to help connect with them, and we had a public survey through the Shape Your City website. And there was great participation in both of those particular initiatives. There's also an opportunity for folks to submit their ideas on the Shape Your City platform and send us project thoughts through the project mailbox. So there was a very comprehensive engagement process with stakeholders and members in the community at large. On the next slide, again, we noted that we had been with you a couple of months ago and really went through you chapter and verse on the housing needs assessment piece. We thought today would be important to just highlight a couple of the three key takeaways that really resonated both with the action team and that they're highlighted in more detail in the report. The first is the very discernible polarization of incomes. So between renters and owners, there's a real clear discrepancy between where they lie on the income piece, with 1/3 of renters in the lowest percentiles of the income range, and about 30 to 40% of owners in the highest income ranges. And that polarization has implications in terms of trying to address the policy needs in the market. The other thing that committee members and members of the public will know is that housing costs have risen faster than incomes, and this has been particularly magnified in the last 5 years. There's figure 2 on page 7 of the report really helps explain that in more detail. The last key piece is that the options that exist out in the market don't realign with the realities of what households can afford in the community. And we'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But that's a very significant finding, and the notion of trying to align those needs in the community with market realities is an important part of what the Housing Action Plan strives to do. As you can see here, we've also identified the 4 gap areas, those for supportive and special needs who typically have household incomes under $35K, households who are more just either due to income or circumstances more vulnerable, falling in that same income bracket. There's a constituency of renters who fall within a more middle income area, 35 to 45K a year, who are experiencing challenges within the market, and owners, those who are making under 70K a year in terms of household that aren't quite able to access that marketplace. So on the next slide, we can see that based on the stakeholder discussions and the needs assessment, there were some very clear and compelling emerging issues that we then started to frame solutions and responses around. In the first instance, affordability being top of mind in most instances. And as mentioned in the prior slide, there's a couple of areas within the continuum where that affordability is most acute. What we also noted, and what stakeholders were clear to tell us, is that there's a limited mix of housing, especially in that mid-density area. We have a lot of low-rise apartments, a fair amount of low-density single detached development, but not a lot of housing options in between. There's continued demand for non-market housing, that housing that provides rents that are below market levels, whether that's through traditional social housing, public housing, or affordable housing. And that area serves those in the lowest income percentile, so it's an important part of the market, and there's continuing demand there. There's also sustained pressures on the regular rental market in terms of access to those particular units. Clear concerns about the loss and quality of the existing stock. Again, because of the age of the stock in St. John, there's a necessary service life to some of that stock, and as the development occurs over time, redevelopment pressures to upgrade that stock and maintain it in good order. A very clear concern within the stakeholder and the community at large. There's also a number of opportunities and challenges associated with developing new supply, so bringing new affordable housing online, and that's from both a process and a market point of view. And while there's certainly opportunities to work through existing planning policies, as we mentioned, there's some good foundational work there. There's other opportunities that could be expanded. And as Randy mentioned, this came back time and again from folks in the community and stakeholders, that while there might be some great pieces, coordinating and collaborating with those pieces to sort of make something better than the sum of the whole was a clear top of mind issue for them. On the next slide, one of the challenges, especially when we're talking to stakeholders, was understanding what we mean by affordable. And again, while most folks are familiar with CMHC's benchmark definition, where a household would not spend more than 30% of their before-tax household income on accommodation, we have to position that a little bit more finitely in order to make it provide context. So if, for instance, a household had a household income of over $200,000 and was spending more than 30% of their income, they may not have a real affordability problem. So in terms of situating this definition, we've added an extra caveat, and this is inconsistent with other policy areas. So in the case of owners, if the ownership cost is no greater than the 60th income percentile for the community, and for renters, the rental cost is no greater than the 30th income percentile. So that's the second part of that affordability test. On the next slide, I think we can illustrate this in a little bit more detail to help understand the dimensions of this problem. In the middle of this graph, you can see the income level, and we've provided that household income level at each of the various percentiles. And that simply means if we took the whole distribution of all households in the community and divided them into 10 equal pieces, we would come up with income deciles. This is an important policy tool in understanding income distribution. So in this instance, you can see that at the 30th income percentile, the income level is $36,570. If we translated that into a monthly affordable rent, that is the 30% rule, that household would pay no more than $910 per month rent in order to fall within that affordability threshold. A similar household who was in an ownership situation would pay no more than $129,000, or almost $130,000 rather, in terms of what an affordable house price based on standard provisions around a 5-year mortgage term, down payment, principal, interest, and taxes. So there's a calculation that we provide to that. So you can see at the 30th income percentile for renters, that rent of $910 becomes the threshold. Folks who are unable to pay more than that aren't able to access some of the opportunities in the marketplace. You can see just above that in the green box, Cmhc Rents, when we were measuring this for 2021, were averaging for a one-bedroom $591 and up to a three-bedroom at $953. So you can see that some of those rents might be affordable to some individuals, some individual renters, but by and large, anyone who needed, three-bedroom or more, it would not be. The other thing that's important to remember here is that those Cmhc rents represent averages. And what was clear from the needs assessment report was that some of the newer units that are coming online charge market rents that are higher than those Cmhc averages. If we look at the 60th income percentile, a little farther to the right side, you can see at that level, the affordable income decile at that point is $71,100. Again, if you translate that into an affordable house price, you can see that it would be $252,790. So that simply states that for individuals at that income range, they could afford a house price of $252,790 or less. When we look above that, again in the green boxes, what the market tells us is that you might be able to find a resale single or more likely a semi-detached at that particular price point. But as you move up, there's not many options for individuals in the community to access affordable housing. As you can see, new single detached are in that sort of just under 350 range. So the important thing we're trying to illustrate here is that when you think about the incomes that people have in order to provide expenditure towards housing, there are limitations in terms of the options that exist in the marketplace. And one of the goals of the action plan is to try and find or stimulate more options within the affordability ranges of what people can afford to pay. If we go to the next slide, one of the things that we took a look at as part of developing the plan was understanding this existing policy framework and the system that was in place today to help respond to these needs. We've got and it's really important to keep in mind the systems thinking here. Housing is a complex and interconnected market that involves a number of players. In Figure 6 on page 16, we highlight some of that in the action plan to help illustrate all of the different entities that are involved in addressing needs across the housing spectrum. So in that traditional system, you have senior governments who set policy. The city has its local policy within that broader context, again, in traditional thinking, more aligned with land use and regulating development. The stakeholders in the community, like the nonprofit organizations, land banks, etc., they're out there either providing housing or programming or initiatives in order to help act on some of that policy and programs that senior government set. And certainly there's a wide range of options that exist within the housing toolbox, and we go into some detail in the action plan to describe those. What we're starting to see now, and Randy provided insights into this, is that the system's evolving a bit more. The federal government is engaged in a very significant way through the National Housing Strategy. The province has redefined its roles to some degree within that framework. The city has been trying to pursue a more supportive environment for housing, and that there's, as we mentioned, and as represented by the action team, a number of really important community partners who are really working to advance efforts on this file. The bottom line, though, is that there still remain persistent issues and challenges that require more attention. And what the plan's objectives are is to start pushing in a more coordinated and cohesive way to addressing that. So we look at that as a positive in terms of moving the system forward. With that, on the next slide, one of the important things was to set out strategic directions that would help guide the plan. And as part of the project charter, a vision was set out stating that St. John is a vibrant, inclusive, and thriving community with a diverse range of safe and affordable housing. And as we worked through that, we wanted to make sure that how the plan moved forward was reflective of the principles. And we spent some time speaking with people in the community, the stakeholders, and also the action team about some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I think you can see that a number of these support good planning principles, principles of inclusion, and recognition that housing is a really important part of any healthy community. And that should help drive the plan in terms of the solutions. On the next slide, you can see that we've grouped the response to the issues in three main areas. So if our goal and our vision has been set and we've set out the principles, what are the primary actions that we're trying to do? Well, in the first instance, we're talking about improving system awareness and coordination. That notion of organizing the parts to work better collectively, to leverage the resources that are there and to help move the system forward to produce better outcomes. The second part, knowing that there's such a constituency of lower income households in the community, is to really support and invest the non-market housing solutions, the ones that serve that bottom 1/3 of the market. There's continued demand for those units, and the fact that the income distribution continues to show a need in that area really supports the notion of investing further to make sure there's housing solutions that work for them. Thinking beyond that, though, there's a lot of consideration to helping preserve and improve the existing housing stock. And while there's been some growth, certainly in the last few cycles, there's a heavy reliance on existing stock to help support and house individuals in the community. Not the least of which is, it's usually more cost effective to preserve and invest as opposed to building new. So maintaining the stock that you have and improving it is a very important objective in terms of the actions looking forward. That said, the next objective really talks about expanding the supply and range, because we can't preserve that existing stock forever. How can we continue to expand and widen the range of options that help respond to the affordable realities in the community? In terms of number 5, the notion of cultivating a more responsive system. And this is a challenge, again, when you have an interconnected and complex system responding to the needs that are out there in the community. How can we make that system more responsive, addressing the needs, being proactive? And the last primary area is really to look at leveraging partnerships and resources. How can we best take advantage of the resources, the knowledge, the capacity that exists within the system, again, focusing it towards the outcomes that we need. Within the plan, we talked about establishing actions and used these 6 priority areas as a way of organizing the actions that exist within the plan. The next slide, while we've got these objectives, we had some fairly extensive discussions about establishing plan targets. So again, the notion of trying to be progressive, achieving outcomes, and moving the plan forward. Well, if we don't set targets or benchmarks for where we're headed with that, it's going to be a bit more challenging to address that need. So with that in mind, we looked at past development over the last 15 to 25 years. We looked at the development trends and then also considered what might help move the needle a bit forward in terms of meeting the challenges and the objectives that had been set out. So on that basis, we set targets for dwelling type, tenure, and affordability. In doing that, I think it's important to remember that the targets are just a benchmark for encouraging that change. They're not prescribed, they're not mandatory, but they are a means of measuring those steps forward. They're really focused on the new units that are coming online, whether that's through development, infill, or intensification. And it's expected that the actions outlined in the plan and the efforts of community partners will work together to help achieve those particular targets. I think it's important also to remember that when we think about these targets, we can appreciate that there's development cycles, so there's going to be activity from year to year. So we look at these as 5-year targets. They should be measured annually in terms of achievement towards that, but that 5-year period will help give a sense of the cycles that happen within that. So they're established on a 5-year basis. The next slide, I'm not going to go through all of the specific actions. I think those have been documented in detail on the report, but I'll just highlight a few things as we move through each of the theme areas. In terms of improving system coordination and awareness, again, the real thrust behind this set of actions relates to putting the plan into action, making it clear who's leading the different actions, providing coordination and accountability. So as with any good plan, it needs to be actionable. The other actions within this area talk about broadening public awareness through education campaigns, making housing information more accessible to individuals, and really focusing on that monitoring piece to ensure that we can measure how we're doing in accordance with the opportunities that exist out there. On the next slide, under theme 2, these are really actions that are intended to support and invest in that non-market housing area. Again, there's an emphasis here on trying to address the most vulnerable needs in the community, primarily through the community agencies and organizations that are already providing these services to help them continue to do the work that they do, but also to advocate for additional resources and more flexibility in the programs that senior governments provide in order to help expand this area. A really important piece that Randy alluded to was the establishment of the St. John Affordable Housing Fund, initially in the order of $800K, with the notion to have that replenished through senior government programs as we move forward. Really putting money on the line to help move the affordable agenda forward. The third suite of actions in the next slide talks about preserving and improving existing stock. The city has an established urban development incentive program, and this is a great vehicle to continue to launch and move forward in terms of expanding to address the needs to help support the existing stock out there. There's some other levers in terms of grants in lieu that might help additionally facilitate some of this, again, through the work of the Dangerous and Vacant Buildings program, but also seeking additional authorities here from the province to give that more teeth to help provide enforcement as a means of ensuring that existing stock can be retained. The next slide talks about theme area 4 in terms of expanding supply and range of affordable options. And again, it's that area about investing in terms of creating new stock. There's a number of senior government programs at the federal and provincial level, and really expanding the supply through those programs is an important part of this. Another important piece is really promoting development of those mid-density forms, again, that we've seen as a deficiency within the community. And finally, another really important piece here, municipalities have at their disposal, as do other public entities, a surplus and underutilized properties, and they're a really important tool in terms of addressing affordability. So providing opportunities to access that land on a right of first refusal or first refusal basis, on a priority basis, is an important part of the policy regimen, both municipally and through other levels of government. Theme number 5 on the next slide talks about a more responsive system, and here the focus is really around the existing policy framework and the rules and levers that the organization can push in this regard. So strengthening policies in the municipal plan, again, there's a number of good policies there, strengthening those and making sure they're reflected in the neighborhood plans as they come up for review. Similarly, the zoning bylaw review, providing greater flexibility and supporting housing objectives is an important area just from a policy point of view. Two important pieces that are a little bit larger scale is really advocating for additional protections regarding tenants. I think everyone in the community and members of committee would be well aware of the number of news stories about what's happened for tenants in the last year or two, and it's really magnified the need for additional protections to assist those tenants. And then the second part to that is advocating also for taxation and assessment reforms, as some of those are creating barriers to creating affordable housing. So those are important areas, we would say, as well. The last theme area in the next slide is really about leveraging partnerships and resources. And there's a wide range of opportunities here, from hosting annual housing forums through a partnership with UNB St. John, really building up the technical and development capacity in the sector to actually deliver on the housing. I think you heard Randy talk about another point there about coordinating housing planning policy with the broader region, because the housing market is more regional in nature and doesn't stop at the edge of your borders. And there are implications in the market for how policy is made. I think expanding private sector engagement is an important piece that people raised as well. They're obviously very engaged in the development sector, and trying to build bridges and partnerships in there to help build on that would be a really important benefit to the plan. So in the next slide, what this all leads us to in terms of the actions then is implementation. No plan is worth its weight in salt if we can't implement it. In Appendix 3 of the report, you will find that there's a detailed plan that lays out the actions and also sets out timelines, primary responsibilities, and supporting actors in terms of bringing forward each of those action areas. Really important that in order to be successful, there's a need to have visible leadership to work collectively with that common purpose, and I think the implementation plan provides a great framework for doing that. There's an expectation that, again, a number of players in the community have different roles to play, that this is a community plan. It's not just part of the city's responsibility, that's a shared responsibility of the community. Likewise, there should be shared accountability for those outcomes. Really allocating the necessary resources is an important part of this, and I think, again, you're seeing some bona fide commitments within the plan in a monetary and resource level to help do that. But at the end of the day, we know through the public awareness piece that there really is a need to build broader support in the community and understanding about the issue in order to properly address it. And as with any plan, as we mentioned before, actively monitoring and communicating progress on the plan is going to be a very important part of that. With that, Ed and I would be happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Great, thank you both, Mr. Starr and Mr. Folds, for the presentation. So I'll invite now committee members to sign up to ask any questions. Okay, first up is Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ken. Thanks for that really high-level, extensive overview of the plan. The plan's obviously much bigger than that. We have both copies here in our kit, and I've been working my way through it. I have a lot of questions. I'm just going to aim for two, I think, that are overarching questions I have, and maybe go further after that. I'm wondering about the resourcing of this. Currently, You know, I'm looking at files that we currently work in the city. So something like our climate action plan, which has been around since 18. We don't have anybody at the city level who's really dedicated to that full time. There are a number of people who mostly work that off the side of their desk, and I will say they've been able to do a lot with a little in our greenhouse gas emissions or impacts and moving big projects forward. But how many people specifically do you think will be needed to resource this plan effectively? I mean, I'm just going through the list of stuff here, and I love to see the extensiveness of the plan for sure. But I know the city manager, you've said it a number of times, you know, a plan without resourcing is just a what? Hallucination. A hallucination. So I don't want to hallucinate here. I don't want to see a mirage in the desert and get there and be out of water. How many people do you think is going to be needed to resource this effectively? How many of them can we use that are in-house to work it off their side of their desk? But then how many dedicated net new staff will we need to really push this appropriately?
Well, I think, firstly, as mentioned, the intent here is really that this is a community plan, and that certainly from our perspective and the discussions we've had, there's a shared responsibility for delivering on this. I think the second thing I would say is that we have an excellent action team that was engaged who cover many of the key resource areas in terms of nonprofits, CMHC, the provincial government, etc. So there's an expectation as we talk about here, in particularly recommendations number 1 and number 2. So there's a core housing facilitator function, so certainly an FTE that would be dedicated to this. We certainly see that. And that the Housing Advisory Committee mentioned in recommendation number 2 would help provide some of that facilitation work. And as we've outlined in the rest of the plan, there are secondary obligations. So when we talk about things like policy reviews through the municipal plan, zoning updates, that's obviously going to engage planning staff and be part of the work that they already do on the side of their desk. So in its first instance, we see really one significant FTE dedicated full-time to this, and that the coordination of the other pieces would be through a combination of resources on the side of their desk, to use the phrase that you mentioned, and through community entities.
Have you ever heard of, and I guess this question relates to it, and then I'll pass it along, Chair, but have you ever heard of an instance where you have a plan like this at a municipal level, where there's a shared responsibility, where they're able to leverage, and I know this is a bit out of the box, but they've been able to leverage funding for further dedicated hires together as a shared group? Because you're right, we have nonprofit groups in this community that are working together on this. We have neighborhood development groups, there's community centers. I'm just wondering, and this is a community problem as you've outlined, but I'm just curious, have you, in your work on this file, have you encountered that reality where together they're able to pool to get that city support? Because I'm just looking from our own resourcing in-house perspective, and there's a lot of concern we have at just being able to keep up with what we are currently doing in work, never mind adding net new. And I'm just not sure I see a path forward here that can resource this well with just a community group of volunteers who already have their full-time work and full-time jobs, and one person on staff. So is there examples you can give us to kind of work from there?
I think certainly there's examples in other communities where they've accessed funding. It's tended to be on a sort of a project basis. So there's a sunrise and a sunset to some of those projects. But I think as an example, one of the things everyone is anxiously awaiting, and I'm sure the committee's familiar with this, is CMHC's Housing Accelerator Fund. Those dollars are to be earmarked specifically for municipalities, from what we understand. There's been some preliminary discussions about what they could be used for, but we would see something like that as an opportunity to actually raise some additional funds. Ed, you probably are aware of some other examples.
Yeah, The other example that we've seen is a fund called the Community Transformation Fund, which we've helped groups access, whether it's municipalities or community agencies that would also help cover some of these costs. But the councillor's question maybe is a little broader. A good example, we did some work in Ottawa with what we call the shared services model, where a number of organizations came together, including the municipality and community housing providers and support agencies, to examine how they could share the responsibility for delivering various services in housing, such as we've outlined in this report. And it could be possible, quite apart from seeking a lot of outside funding, just to look at the range of responsibilities that could be shared between these different organizations and carve it out so that all the necessary actions can be taken. We do think strongly that the idea of an in-house facilitator or coordinator that would quarterback the whole exercise would be extremely beneficial to achieving this plan, and that these funding sources will be available to you. But if there's concern about those costs, etc., that is a model we've seen that's worked.
Great, thank you.
City Manager, do you have a comment?
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor and to the entire committee, a couple quick thoughts. First of all, the City of St. John was invited to make a presentation to the federal committee on the Housing Accelerator Fund. And one of the things we spoke about there was giving us the flexibility to actually, when they start taking a look at funding allocations, to use it for staffing, either dedicated staffing, third-party work, project work, whatever else. Give us that flexibility. I just offer that up there. Second point I would offer is this is the initial plan. And I think we would be hard-pressed, anyone in this room, to predict what changes to that plan would need to happen a year from now. And maybe a year from now, 1 is not enough, 5 is required, 10 is required. Who knows? This will be further complicated by the provincial government, who is seriously looking at downloading certain elements of the social agenda down to the municipal level. And if some of their responsibilities in terms of affordable housing and or homelessness are downloaded to the municipal or regional level, then with that, I anticipate staffing requirements would also need to go up. The final point I would, however, highlight is, intuitively speaking, I must admit to you that I'm not at all interested in developing a standalone urban planning capability for affordable housing. Whatever we do in affordable housing must be closely linked to our broader urban planning efforts. So I kind of like the idea of having some dedicated assets working on it. And right now we're saying 1 to begin with, but that dedicated asset is not by any stretch of the imagination doing all of the work, that they will have to tie in closely to the remainder of the city's planning team, including our bylaw enforcement, including our urban planning, including our incentives programs, etc., and also tie into the broader stakeholder engagement within the community. So I personally think it would be the wrong move to build a standalone capability. The networked capability that is recommended within this action plan, I think, is a great first start, and then we see how we have to build it there afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of comments and then a question or two. I was listening with interest to you, Randy, about your comments, and one of the things that I'd like to make clear is St. John definitely has a huge problem with affordable housing. St. John also has the largest population of people living in poverty, per capita in the country. So it's not that we're the only place that has this problem. You go to any major center, they'll have the same problem, but not to the degree we have. And the city is taking action. Just recently, in the last couple of months, we've been able to give the land bank some land to help with their projects. And affordable housing unit on Boar's Head Road, got some land. So the city is taking direct action now that years ago we wouldn't be looking at because it was a different level of government's area to look at. We talk about strategies for, that are data-driven and, playing one area off the other. And I think, I sit on the Regional Service Commission for the council, and I think we're looking at one of the responsibilities is regional planning. And to the city manager's point, we've got to look at the bigger picture when we're talking about planning in all areas. So that's there. Now we talk about housing costs and the rising faster than incomes. So I'm wondering if the subsidy for housing are rising at the same rate or if they're still behind. Because I think the two are quite linked. If the cost of housing is going up and the subsidy from the province is staying the same, we've got another issue that's not helpful. The housing supply, when we look at it, there's a lot of interest, myself included, in trying to upgrade and repair units that already exist. So if you have a 4-unit building that needs to be repaired, you focus on trying to get that done. I'm wondering, where do we have more success? Is it in our large tenement buildings that we've been putting up across the city? We're focusing on affordable housing and we've got 24, 40 units, or are we more successful in the neighborhood areas where we're getting 2, 4, 6 units here, there, and everywhere? Because I think once we decide, this plan's working, but not as quickly as putting up a 40 unit, and we've got a crisis, we need to start, how are we going to get those big units up and quickly? And where are we going to get the resources for it? And I think that plays a big part too in these rent evictions that we're faced with. Because, if we can put larger complexes up quickly, then we're giving people a place to go. And we're also taking people out of places that are only going to be increased because, those landlords want you out so they can put the prices up. So I think what we've seen here today, folks, is a plan that, certainly addresses a lot of those issues. And I'm very impressed with it. I know that a lot of time and effort went into it, and a lot of stakeholder involvement, which I appreciate. And I guess that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I'm going to offer some comments here as well. And I know this is the first step, right? We're sending this out to the community next. So I think this is just my piece of feedback here. And I really hope we can encourage all those who have thoughts about this, who want to dig into it, to respond to the Shape Your City, to write directly. They're giving lots of opportunities to do that. So I agree with Councillor Harris on sort of where are we at on how can we resource this. Obviously, this is really a big, amazing project. So I'm just looking at it as and including now Deputy's comments as well. What is some of that low-hanging fruit that we can tease out of this? So what can we edit down to sort of a short-term, long-term, short wins or little wins, big wins, short-term wins, long-term wins, because as we know in this space, it can get bogged down with bureaucracy really fast. So I really want to find and planning and not really working on that implementing. So I'd love to understand more, what are those core things that we can do? What do they cost? When can we get started? Who's it going to take? And all those fundamentals sort of involved in that in regards to recommendations going forward. I also want to understand more about how we're going to maximize that CMHC funding, and what is it that we need to do to ensure that CMHC thinks of us as those leaders and those partners, that we are the best test case for them and the pilots and everything they want to do. And yes, shared responsibility is incredible. I believe in that network, but I do think we need that core lead and that core team leading that effort, because again, I'm on the police chief's advisory committee with many other nonprofits in St. John, and they often find we go down a road of where we end up working in silos. So how can we make sure that there is still someone driving the siloed folks to come together? There just needs to be that core entity that can do it. And I personally think it's the municipality. The more and more I hear, the more I think we're going to be responsible for responding to our own housing needs. So yeah, those are my 12 cents. Okay, Councillor Harris.
Did you want to hear back from them on some of what you said?
I'm good. I'm just offering my comments. You can take or leave
sorry.
any
I
of them.
didn't know you had a que- I thought you had a question in there. One question I had, so we know the cost of building materials is up, but I also know it's coming back down. I've just seen that my own self and my own activities recently. So I don't know where that's going to land us on the spectrum. But what's the case for, I'm not even going to say imposing, building out planning around smaller footprint housing? I'm not talking about tiny homes. I just mean we have I guess let's say a bloated expectation as a society on how many square feet we need to live in. And so I'm just wondering, this plan makes reference to it in a couple places. I'm just trying to remember under what theme. You don't exactly say those words, but is that the intention behind some of the recommendations here around planning, around land use, around designing, that there would be some of those ongoing conversations to incentivize smaller footprint design, which takes fewer dollars further? Is that a sense that we have? Because I know we do need those 3 bedrooms, but they don't need to be in a 3,000 square foot house either, right? We need 3-bedroom units for families. We don't have enough of them for sure, especially with immigration on the rise, bringing larger families. But it's hard to envision how this plan translates into a private developer going out and building the buildings that are smaller because they've got decades of pre-designed builds and expectations they're working from. So how would this plan help drive that outcome where we can use fewer dollars to build, more units on aggregate?
So I think the theme that probably most addresses this is theme 4 in terms of expanding the supply and range. And there's a specific recommendation in there. Again, we come back to the point about mid-density forms. So recommendation 23 speaks about that, really focusing in that area, because it's very clear when we look at your existing stock, there's a great polarity between low-rise apartments and single detached forms. So I think if there's ways to help either promote through alternative development standards, through incentivizing the opportunities to build in that area. One of the interesting things that happens in other communities is as you start to get a price gradient where single detached costs more and there's a bigger separation in the market, all of a sudden those mid-density forms start to look more realistic in the marketplace. One of the things that we heard from the development industry when we were working through this process is that there's been challenges about people's demand in the marketplace for that type of form. So on one hand, you could hear folks say, well, if there was demand for it, we'd build it because we could sell it. I think the other part to that is that there are expectations and there is marketing, as you've mentioned. So I think trying to seed and create the opportunity that these are interesting opportunities, downsizing opportunities for seniors, smaller footprints that are more affordable. I think by showing that it's possible and demonstrating that there's an opportunity there is a great way to help spur that on a bit more.
Thanks.
All right, if there's no questions, no more, all set. Thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate it and very much looking forward to the next steps and seeing what the community has to say. So once again, check it out on Shape Your City. All right, so if I can get a motion to receive and file this report, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Harris. On the question, all those in favor? Good, okay. All right, moving on. So now we are going to have a feedback session on the Affordable Housing Grant Fund. And we're going to start off with Jennifer Kirchner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Growth Committee. I'm very pleased to be here today to give a brief overview of what we've been working on in regards to the creation of an affordable housing grant fund. As you would all know, back in May of this year, Common Council did approve a motion to allocate a one-time amount of funding from the Regional Development Corporation and the federal government to the general operating budget for the Affordable Housing Action Plan. Of this, $800,000 has been allocated to a one-time funding to establish a new affordable housing grant fund, which will support the development of new affordable housing units across the city. This aligns quite perfectly with the presentation you just heard from our consultants and aligns with many of Council's strategic priorities as they're moving forward through your term. So we have hired a Dillon Consulting to help facilitate the work, look at and create different options for how this fund could be utilized and administered. We will be presenting an overview of that with the intention of bringing back a more final recommendation to Growth Committee in September of this year. So we do have Jennifer Brown from Dillon Consulting who will give you an overview of the presentation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to the Growth Committee for having me. Really always a pleasure to see such friendly faces around the horseshoe here. I'm just going to take a second to get set up. Perfect. So as Jennifer mentioned, this is we're very much in preliminary stages here. I'm going to describe the three introductory options that we're hoping to kind of evolve this affordable housing grant from. Just the context for the presentation today, I'm just going to talk about the scope of work that we're actually trying to undertake here. This is a situation where you've got a bucket of money before your action plan is going to be finalized. So we understand that the alignment opportunity is there, but it's not going to be perfect. But we're going to try our best to get it there. We'll go over the housing grant options, like I mentioned. We'll talk about some of the requirements. We'll compare those options, and we'll talk very high level about preliminary recommendations. So in terms of the scope of work, Jennifer introduced this already, this $800,000 from the RDC. In terms of that affordability definition, we're looking, again, CMHC, the traditional 30% definition, understanding it is a bit more complex than that. The action plan has dictated that already. We'll do our best to continue to align here. In terms of affordable housing grant, I should note, it really is about prioritizing rental units. However, all models are envisioned to be eligible here. In terms of a proposed timeline, we're really, like I said, very preliminary stages here. We'll be kind of introducing them here now, drafting over August, working through in September, hopefully with the help of your committee that's been struck on this, looking ultimately for implementation and distribution from November onwards. So what we're talking about today, again, these are very much starting points. We're expecting these to evolve into your actual program, so picking piecemeal from each of these options is very reasonable expectation. So the dollar values, keep in mind, are estimates. We're using some sample projects to kind of get the thought process going here. We're envisioning that other incentive, so applicants may be able to kind of double dip here. You have an incentive program, which is very successful. This grant can be partnered with that grant. And we're not applying this affordable housing grant to a single geography. We are suggesting that projects be within the intensification area. Plan SJ really directs that. You're looking at intensification area because there's assumptions here that you're close to transit, you're closer to amenities, you're closer to pedestrian infrastructure, cycling infrastructure, which just makes, good sense. So the first option we're going to discuss is that building permit fee exemption. It can apply, and we're envisioning it apply to in whole or in part, depending on the project. So obviously, if you're a full nonprofit, all units being nonprofit, non-market units, exemption would apply to the whole project. in part, it would apply in part to those private developments that have mixed income. The key here, and I think the deputy mentioned this earlier, this opportunity to apply it to both new builds and also an opportunity to apply it to renovations. Renovations of existing units that may be on the lower end of the market rentals. There's options to explore there as well. We've looked at administering this through two options: exempted applied per affordable unit, and exemption applied by ratio. So obviously applied per unit, very straightforward. You get your permit fees exempted based on how many units or based on your affordable unit. That would be reimbursed upon issuance of occupancy permit. The exemption applied by ratio, we're looking at an option that says if you have 50% of those units or above in a planned development are affordable, then 100% of your fees could be reimbursed. If you're under 50%, then you just go back to that per unit calculation. In terms of the second option, we're looking at lump sum per unit. This can be simply described as a top-up for those who have already received some sort of benefit from either provincial program or a federal program. It's really going to be tied quite tightly to your province's affordable housing program. This is intended to and designed to boost up those projects that have challenges moving from design to construction. The other thing that to keep in mind here is there's an option to use this kind of top up to incentivize additional floor plans or to fill in those market gaps. So we hear a lot about the need for 3-bedroom units. There's an opportunity to design this program so that add a bedroom, get additional funds. There is another option here to keep on the table. It's this using the lump sum top up funds to convert current market units to affordable units. There's some pot of kind of grant money out there to be had for those type of conversions, and lending a grant program to that may incentivize and really be the tipping point for those types of conversions. In terms of administration, we're looking at this being really the most kind of straightforward to administer. You're looking at those projects that already have invested time into getting funding from the province, and you're kind of piggybacking on that funding. So preliminary example of what this would look like, an additional $10,000 per affordable unit, max cap of $200,000 per project, for example, an additional $50,000 available in bonus funds for market gap solutions. Again, those are just estimates, but we're seeing larger sums of money go to certain projects. The project-based is really what it sounds like. We're looking at those shovel-ready projects, those projects that are currently in the hopper, creating some criteria around kind of what you want to prioritize as a municipality, and apply those funds to 2 or 3 projects. So this push of these units need to get on the ground or in the ground immediately, let's apply funds to selective projects to get them built. The big thing here is we're looking at prioritized units based on the total contribution of affordable units. So highest number of units receives the largest portion of the grant. In terms of administering this option, we're looking at kind of 2 examples. We can look at that larger pot of money and course it over 3 grants or 3 equal grants, depending on the evaluation of a committee, evaluation of standard criteria. Those criteria would likely look at, again, shovel readiness, degree of impact the funds may have on getting those affordable units online, and any project challenges. In terms of the grant requirements, so the big thing here is, and this is the question that, in talking to the development community so far, and talking to the nonprofit housing folks, how do we guarantee long-term that these units are going to continue to be affordable, stay on the affordable side of the market? And a legal agreement would obviously be necessary in order to secure that long-term affordability. Again, this mention of placing these within intensification areas, proximity to transit stops, there's obviously a potential for that maybe not to be met. What we're saying here is if there's not immediate access, there needs to be some sort of agreement that in the future it can be contemplated. We're also looking at the requirements, boosting the requirements or opportunity for accessible units. We understand that there are regulations that developers have to follow in terms of ratios, but if we can incentivize more accessible units being constructed as a baseline, that's really the way to go here. In terms of unique requirements based on these different options. So in terms of the lump sum, you're looking at the ratio of in-demand or market gaps. Obviously, more money can go to a 3-bedroom unit than would standardly go to a 1 or 2-bedroom unit. And this conversion piece, conversion of market units to a non-market unit applying for additional funds. Project-based, again, I mentioned this earlier, at least 50% of the makeup of the building would have to be affordable units. If not, obviously, they just would be exempted from the fund. In terms of the comparison of options, so we used kind of four projects that have received some level of approval and are either in building stage or approaching building stage: Cliff Street, Wellington Row, Via Collaborate Way, and Brunswick Drive. So the first three are all mixed market, some more than others. And the last one on this list here are all market unit or non-market units. In terms of what this looks like under each of those examples. So the building permit exemption, you're getting the lowest grant value of all the 3 grants. What that means, though, is you have the ability to spread that a bit further. In terms of your grant money, you can spread that a bit further, but there is indication that this could potentially be the lower overall impact of all of the options. I mentioned I did talk to your development community. There is a sense that there should be some sort of lens to or research of the opportunity to just baseline exempt folks from building permits for affordable units. That's what we're hearing in the community, likely not something that is at all surprising. The lump sum per unit approach, it is the most predictable of the 3 options. You have grant money, you'll get more grant money from the city. It is the second in place in terms of grant value options, but it does have its benefit that it is predictable. It can move projects from challenged to unchallenged. The project-based is obviously the larger value of the 3 options, but with that, it's the fewest project impacted. It does require that evaluation of projects, so there is a bit of timeliness potentially becoming an issue there. There is some complexity in terms of administration. In talking to your development community, the lump sum per unit approach seemed to be, with some wiggle room there, seemed to be the ones that people were most responsive to. I should also say your affordable housing committee, the folks that went through the action plan, these options were also discussed with them, and the lump sum was really where they landed as well. The building permit exemption also being obviously top of mind, so some sort of combination of both. In terms of that building permit exemption piece, I think the kind of pro and con to that is, it could incentivize folks to come through the door with more affordable units in these market developments. The role of the city there is determining whether or not that upfront revenue loss, if they're comfortable with that, because it could potentially be, in the hundreds of thousands, depending on the size of the building. In terms of preliminary recommendations, we would like to suggest that, and this is in consult with the group of staff that I've been lucky enough to work with on this so far, that the option you're looking at is to evolve from this lump sum per unit grant as at least a starting point. So because it's predictable, it has that immediate impact to these planned projects that are sitting in your hopper already. We can really see it hitting the ground running quite soon. The other expectation here is that we explore through this, or through staff direction, explore what building permit exemption for affordable units might look like as a baseline incentive and a baseline kind of program with the city. And we're hoping to use the Affordable Action Plan Committee as kind of the stakeholder drivers here. So throughout the next 2 months, working through the evolution of this grant option with them. I will continue. I have a group of developers that I've been discussing this with. There's a few more that I'd like to add to my list. I would suggest that developer engagement be undertaken at the same time to really make sure that this is going to be as impactful as possible. I mentioned at the beginning, there's really no way for us to get this perfect, but I think there's a way for us to use this grant to satisfy what the city wants to do, which is get more affordable housing units on the market as quickly as possible. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Harris, you're up first.
City Manager. Jen, always lovely to see you. Thank you for that overview. I also love the opportunity to have this discussion because all too often it's we don't have an ability to dream with within the process. My first look at the lump sum, because I'm amenable to it, I would prefer the project based. I think that gives us the best opportunity to do something that isn't diluted by any other funding stream that we could say, we made this intervention here. It produced this. It meant this for the community. We can measure it a lot easier. If we're providing a $10,000 lump sum payment to the other projects, like if I'm building a building and I've qualified for CMHC as the developer, and I've qualified for nonprofit housing from the province of New Brunswick, and then there's a $10,000 tack on, who gets credit for that, right? Who gets credit for that development? And what can we really stand on to say, look, we intervened and made the difference? Would those units have not been made without us, or would they have? It's hard for us to tell. It's hard for us to prove. But at the end of the day, I agree. If it does help it along, it helps it along. So I guess my thought is, like, my math is like $180 a square foot to build right now.
Roughly, yeah. So the estimates, so there's some discrepancy in what's being reported, because what's being reported is using data for just building costs. That's
Sure.
No soft costs involved.
Yeah, we're talking 5-on-1 or whatever, right?
Right. So it's closer to 200 by estimates of kind of what we're getting documented right now from the federal government, but that doesn't include soft costs.
Right. So if we're at, let's say 200, the average math here is that we're subsidizing about 40 square foot of a unit per development. That's a really, really low impact, I guess. We've talked about it as a council before. You know, Coverdale came up a number of months ago and they were looking for an ability to forgive the permitting fees. And we didn't have any policy or anything within it to do it at the time. I was really upset and disappointed by that. We did go to support them in other ways. But at the same time, I think that's a no-brainer. And I'm glad you brought that up from the community. That's something I've heard as well. But I think I look at this, I guess those would be my concerns, is if we are going to roll the lump sum, and if the other councilors around the table and council overall and staff would rather go with that lump sum thing, I need to understand how we're going to prove our involvement mattered. Because getting affordable units is on the markets is great, but being able to prove that we can be trusted with more resources is the most important thing. And I'm not convinced CMHC and the province are going to look at us and say, hey, you guys did a great job here, and we want to send you more money to do more work. So if we have to go to the project-based, yeah, we're going to get fewer buildings on there, but I think it will be definitive buildings. And I would be more comfortable with that. But anyway, I look forward to the comments of others around the table or other staff on that front.
I guess I'll go next. So I'm wondering, Jennifer, sorry, I went to high school with Jen. So, so I'm just wondering, have you looked at affordable housing revolving fund options, like where we can be regenerating money into the fund somehow? Has that been something you've looked at?
So it's not something that at this time that me as your consultant has looked into. I know that staff has been responsive to it. So it may be a question that I would direct to Director Ouellette, who may be better equipped to answer that question.
Sure, thank you.
Through the chair to the chair. We've discussed this before, and I think this is a really interesting opportunity, and I see this more so encapsulated in the Affordable Housing Action Plan. I think the ability to yield impacts immediately, which is one of the objectives of this fund, may be compromised if we were looking at a larger, something that we've never done before, in access to the development community. But I think it's certainly an interesting opportunity. I see benefits. It is sprinkled, the vision of that is sprinkled across the Affordable Housing Action Plan, and I look forward to discussing it more in the coming month to figure out what else we need to do for that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I think sorry, City Manager.
Madam Chair, if I can just add, we also, as we develop this, certainly for right now, and it will mature and evolve to be sure, but as we develop this right now, the money we're talking about for this incentive grant program is actually coming from other levels of government, another level of government. And there are some very prescriptive requirements for that money, including when and on what we spend it. So to Councillor Harris's point, I don't disagree. But if it's a large project that's going to manifest itself 3 years from now, it probably won't qualify right now for the money we have available right now. So I do think that this will evolve as we find ways to top up the fund. But right now, our thinking will need to be limited by this fund has certain requirements, including a time requirement. And if we don't satisfy the time requirement, we're going to lose it. So that's why we're very much focused on what is quick and impactful now so that we don't lose the money.
Great, thank you. All right, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's exactly what I was going to say, City Manager. It's unfortunately, a lot of times our hands are tied to criteria around funding that's coming down, and, we just sort of have to work with it. But again, two points that I'd like to make. And everything seems to be, when you talk about affordable housing, we have to have that initial funding to get it started, and then we have to have long-term commitments that are going to rise to the challenge. When things go up, those commitments have to go up. They can't just remain the same, And that's where I have a real concern that, we can get a 10-year commitment, 20-year commitment on subsidy units, 25 subsidy units. But after 4 years, if the prices are rising and those subsidies are staying low, things are going to happen. So I think that that's key, making sure that everything rises at the same level. If it's 2% a year for the cost of living, everything's 2%, including at least 2% for wages. Anyway, I think it's a great plan. I think your recommendations are good. And certainly I'm not in a position to question you because, I'm just a counselor. But I certainly think it's great news and certainly support it. Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
So in the lump sum piece, you laid out some sample projects. Was there any sample projects that qualified? Because I'm just trying to understand from the presentation, and maybe I missed this. Was there anything that qualified for a project-based development? I guess I have two questions here. That would be my first, because I can see that there were already some things in the queue that would qualify for the lump sum, so that makes sense to me. But is that true that there wasn't anything that you could find in the queue that would qualify for that?
In terms of the project base?
Yep.
So when we looked at project-based, there were certain, the one example was the Calabria Way example, which would not qualify, it wouldn't meet the threshold of what we're envisioning for the project base. So it would essentially fall off the list. Then when you look at the project-based draft criteria of at least 50% or more of the units, it prioritizes certain ones over the others. So you're looking at the folks on Brunswick Street. Obviously, it's 12 units, but it's 100% of those of the development. So that gets prioritized over the others. And I'm thinking it was the Wellington has more units, I think.
47.
But then
Brunswick has 12.
Cliff Street has more. You know what? I'm just going to
bigger saturation on Cliff Street. Yeah.
I'm just going to go back to the descriptions to make it clear for myself. So so you've got 28 non-market units in a 56 unit development, it's a lower percentage than the 24 over 47 or however that works. So they're prioritized based on that contribution, that ratio.
That 50% number, that kind of goes against some of my learning, I guess, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong where it comes from. I guess I was always taught when I studied community development that when a neighborhood, I know we're talking about like a single building, but when a neighborhood gets past that 30% threshold for subsidized units, you start to detract from the quality of life outcomes. And you then get to the point where you have an unsustainable neighborhood, which suffer from what I call U-Haul syndrome, which is basically see U-Haul on the block every day because there's not a sense of continuity or dignity in the community because there's so many subsidized units, the neighborhood gets saturated and underdeveloped. So that 50% number, why did we get to 50, I guess, is the question for that threshold.
So through you, Chair, to the councillor, you're absolutely right. We're talking about a 30% neighborhood-wise, but I think you alluded to it. We're talking about a specific, we're talking development-based.
Okay.
So we're looking at this as this is almost like a pilot program. You're looking at one pot of money. We can't assume that it's going to be regenerated or replenished. So we're attempting to make sure that the highest impact developments get the most benefit from this particular pot of money. So the 50% threshold is also keeping in mind that mixed market housing can be very successful. The research would suggest that is the way forward in terms of integrating non-market and market units. We know that that's the way forward in terms of developing a community that is resilient. So we know that you've got to, I guess I'm looking at our neighborhoods going, none of our neighborhoods are affordable. All of our neighborhoods are really at the cusp of unaffordability at the moment. So that threshold of a single development going in at a 50-50 will have minimum impact over the overall numbers.
Right, on aggregate.
Based on this one particular grant. I think long term, as this, opportunity extends and, we look at options to evolve this option long term through your affordable housing action plan. I think you're absolutely right. That number would likely have to come down. And there also would have to be calculations based on income levels of a larger neighborhood. And I think your action plan alludes to that anyhow. But I think that, as I'm drafting this and looking at other examples, the 50% is really about rapidly incentivizing.
Right. Okay, thank you.
City Manager?
Madam Chair, I need to make a point which may cause some consternation amongst our development community, but this money is designed to get more units. This program is not designed to be a retroactive, put more money into pockets of developers who have already developed their business plans for a certain number of units. So I just feel obliged to mention that point because we have on the screens right now some examples to show this committee how the various options might be applied. But I don't want to mislead and say that we're going back in time, and if a developer has already committed to 8 affordable units and it's already within their business plan, that we're now retroactively going to help fund those unless there's a compelling reason to do so. This is forward-looking. This is designed to get more units, not respectfully to pay for the units we already have. I'll use the term in the hopper.
Thank you, City Manager. I'm glad to hear that personally. I think too that we need to prioritize our nonprofits and their projects first and when it comes to this fund. So I hope that can be taken into consideration as when we move forward on this as well. So thank you, Ms. Brown, for your presentation. I'll take the last call for questions and make a motion to receive and file. Okay, Councilor Harris, Deputy. On the question, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. Okay, moving on back to the top of the first agenda we all saw. So we're going to be hearing about the 2022 event scheduling with Greg Cutler.
Thank you very much, Chair Killen, and good afternoon to the Growth Committee. I am here today to discuss the 2022 special event season. Typically, the late spring, summer, and then early fall are busy times. We're essentially halfway through, or maybe a little bit more, unfortunately. But it's a good time to provide a bit of an update on what we've been seeing happen in our community, the good things. So it will be an efficient look at what has happened and what is going to happen, and not exhaustive, but I'll do my best to be representative. So just quickly, I wanted to kind of mention why we in our department and as a city, we think that special events are important. There's a couple of different reasons. We really think it promotes the well-being of the community and individuals. It really helps people feel connected to their neighbors, to the community, and it's also an excellent way to kind of highlight some of our infrastructure, parks and green spaces. We often hear when we have a special event somewhere that somebody from a different area of the city will end up in a park for an event, and they'll mention they forgot about whatever the asset was, so it's a nice way to show off what we do have in the city. Events also help us cultivate community pride. Events influence people's perception of a city, whether they're visitors or residents. As an example, recently the Memorial Cup rolled through, and during the event I thought we felt a lot of energy in the city, and then afterwards a lot of pride, and people were proud of how the city offered a special event. And we did hear many good things from folks that were from outside the city that had experience with large events, and they thought it was a really great event, so it really does add to the community pride. And finally, just a quick point, we all want to support local business, local economy. We do find it's much easier to do so when you're have an ability to gather and to celebrate. As a quick example, just saw this last week, I believe it was. Envision mentioned that the hotel occupancy rate for June of this year was around 72%, I think it was, 71. Last year, obviously a different year without special events, we were hovering in the mid-20s, I think it was. So anyway, special events really do help promote local economy. So if we think they're important, what are we as a city and our departments doing to support special events? We have adopted a model where we have city-led events and also community-led events. We really feel it helps us to manage resources, to encourage diversity in our offerings. As an example of it's basically direct versus facilitated program model. A direct program might be the city market, the night market, whereas something that would be facilitated would be like third shift, where they come to us with an idea, and we kind of help them navigate and manage the event that they want to put on. When we do this too, I also wanted to say that we're lucky in St. John to have a lot of very talented individuals who want to put on events. So working with them really does promote some great events and some diversity in the offerings. We're a smaller department, so having these people come to us and working with them, it does add to what we can offer. We do have a special event task force, which we see as a one-stop shop for special event organizers. There is a bit of a regulatory role with the special event task force. We essentially want to make sure that the best interests of the municipality are met when an event comes through the city. Various members from different departments in the city kind of sit on that task force and vet applications as they come through, just to make sure, again, that they do meet our interests, they're safe, they don't interfere with operations, things like that. So it is a very efficient way of doing things we found this year. Often, there is a regulatory, we vet and accept applications, but oftentimes it's a way of us to connect with the event organizers who have some great ideas and maybe don't know how to navigate the system. So often, if it is a facilitated program that we're talking about, we do spend a lot of time working with the event organizers to make sure that they have what they need, they know how to navigate the system, and maybe even whether it's a liquor license or things like that, we can help them navigate that role as well. We have heard that it does make it a lot easier and less anxiety-inducing for a potential organizer. Just as a last point on the Special Event Task Force, year to date we've seen 25 applications so far, and those are for larger or more complex events. We have more in the hopper too, but 25 that we've seen so far and vetted. And finally, we've hired 2 special event coordinators for the summertime, just to round out our staff, and they're able to help plan, promote, implement our direct and facilitated programs. That's been a big help as well. I wanted to, at this point in time, sort of highlight some of our early season successes. Again, with all due respect to all events that have come through so far, I couldn't highlight them all in my time here today, but some of the early highlights that I wanted to mention today. The first one was our Freedom of the City, which was our first major event in the summer season. It is the highest honor that we could present, as a city could present. It was conferred to the 403 Helicopter Operational Training Squadron. It really allowed us to test out our attention to detail, because it was a lot of protocol and timing of a military helicopter flyover, so that was an important one for us. We can talk about Memorial Cup, but just to know is, the hockey was important too, but we had over 70 activations over the 10 days. We heard very good things from residents and people that were here visiting, whether they were team members or family or media. So we're really proud of that one. City of St. John took a lead role in sort of ensuring that the needs of the special event organizers were met, while also the needs of the businesses and residents in the area. Disability Awareness Week was also a highlight. We had a couple of years due to COVID where we didn't have in-person gatherings for Disability Awareness Week. This year we did. This year we also saw a nice comeback. We had large crowds for all events through the week. I did sort of want to highlight one event. We had a walk and roll challenge. We simply had a parade from Queen Square to King Square, and then met with Councillor Stewart afterwards to bring greetings from the city. So the picture here, we had, again, over 200 individuals. It was a really nice way to kick off Disability Awareness Week in person again. And finally, wanted to mention another highlight. We were able to secure some federal funding through Heritage Canada, the Celebrate Canada Fund, and that allowed us to have Canada Day programming, as well as Indigenous Peoples Day and Canadian Multiculturalism Day. I certainly can't go through the details of those days, but they were successful. Hope to do similar things next year. And yeah, that kind of brings us to where we are now. And we are, again, halfway through the season. I did have a slide here, if we could take a look at just some of the events that are left to come. One thing I wanted to highlight on this is again, there's some city-led and others that are facilitated through community organizing groups. And again, it does kind of highlight the diversity. We have some sports, some culture, some recreation. So until mid to late September, we have some busy weekends coming up, and it's been a successful season so far. I hope that people around the Horseshoe can kind of feel that excitement that we felt so far. It is a lot of work, but after a special event, there's kind of no better feeling than, when you're doing cleanup, but it went well. So I hope I was efficient with my time. I know we were kind of running late, and I'll end with that and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'll send it over to Deputy Mayor McKenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Greg, I just want to tell you that, like having gone through COVID for a couple of years and things were so quiet and everything, and things were, on the downside, let's say, for all communities, not just St. John. You guys have done an exceptional job. I mean, the highlights are one thing, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes, all the programming for the kids in the community centers and so on. It really makes a difference in the community, really makes a difference. And I just wanted to, let you know that we really appreciate it, because you and your team go above and beyond, and I don't think people realize it enough. So thank you very much for this, and it's great that we've got a little snapshot of what's coming up. I don't know what rides at Rockwood is. Is that horseback or is that bicycles? What are we riding?
Through chair to deputy. So first of all, thank you very much. It has been a busy year. We knew that just based after the last couple of years we came through that it was going to be busy and people wanted to get together. But we really wanted to make sure that when they came together again, it was quality programming and left people feeling safe, because we're still concerned about keeping people safe, but also had a really good time and really felt that community pride that we wanted them to feel. Rides at Rockwood is a large, and I do mean large, car show.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes on every year. I think it's the third or fourth year now, and it grows every year. If you do get a chance, that's one that I do hope to take in.
Yeah, I've been up there, but I didn't realize it was called Rides of Rockwood.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no, it goes really, really well, so.
Councillor Lowe?
And things that go on out there. I mean, they've had 2 weekends where you couldn't get near the parking lot. And then they got, I know because of the exhibition, we're moving in there this year to do entertainment, but I know there's a large-scale dog show that's one of the largest in the country, right? Do you ever keep in touch with the Y people that run the field house? Because it would draw a lot of people out there, ample parking and et cetera.
Through the chair, Councillor, I have to admit, I don't. I've kind of changed direction in my, now with the growth department, that seems to be more recreation and community services. I do know that they offer really great programming, but day to day, I don't get to connect with them as much as I did in the past. I'm not sure if a colleague would have anything to add.
Send it over to Dave Topstein.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. A fantastic question. I think the presentation that Greg has shared with us provides a snapshot of events that are taking place in what we would call the public sphere or public spaces. So these are all events that are primarily happening either in the city's right-of-way, either on streets. We saw a lot of activation at, all the events that are happening this summer. Say, for example, Canterbury and Grannon. There's things that happened, with our hockey tournament that was just here, things that are happening again with Moonlight Bazaar later this year, and more activations that are happening even this weekend. So, but what we didn't capture is things that are happening in private facilities. So, but there's lots of those things happening as well. And again, this is just a snapshot of some of the things that are happening.
Thank you very much. Great work to the Growth and Community Services team. You guys do so much across the board. It's outrageous. We can go from talking about affordable housing to development to streetscape happenings. It's really amazing. So thank you for your contribution. Mr. Kettler.
Thank you. Thank you for the support.
All right. So I'll just take a motion to receive and file, please. Deputy and myself. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Okay, well, do we have to wait for Councillor Lowe to return? Yeah, okay. We will just pause here for one moment. If you want to come up, yeah, Valentin, and get ready, we'll get going as soon as Councillor Lowe returns.
Try not to take it personal.
All right, I just need to call the question, Councillor Lowe, on the receive and file for the last one. So if I get a seconder for that, it has to be you. I can't hear you. Oh, sorry, you need to second the last receive and file because there's only 3 of us. Yeah. That's okay. Okay. All in favor? Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, next up, we have a presentation from Valentin Budinsky on the Ukrainian arrivals in St. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councillors, members of the committee. Thanks for your interest in what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening with Ukrainians arriving in St. John. I'm happy to present on this issue. I'm conscious of time, so I'll be very brief, but still I would like to start with a bit of context first. So 5 months ago, almost to the day, Russia launched a war on Ukraine. And in that period of time, as of last month, June statistics from the UN, over 12 million Ukrainians have left their homes, a lot of them permanently. A lot of them moved to other relatively safer places in Ukraine. By relatively safe, I mean the places where there aren't any active fighting away from the war zone, but nowhere is safe in Ukraine. And therefore, over 5 million people have left Ukraine. A lot of them are now in Europe, and you can see on the slide the European countries and the amount of Ukrainians they have been receiving since the start of the war. Many of these countries have separate support programs aimed at Ukrainians with different sort of features and supports available to those vulnerable populations. So, and the exodus, if I can call it that, still continues. Canada back in March, introduced a special program which is called Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel. That's targeted specifically at Ukrainian nationals and their family members. And so far, again, at the beginning of July, the amount of applications received under that program was over 350,000. Out of those, 150,000 applications have been already approved, and out of those, over 55,000 people have already landed in Canada. Now, what's important to understand in this context is that Ukrainians arriving under this program, they are not classified as refugees. There are pros and cons to that decision from various perspectives, Ukrainian perspective including. What that means in practice is that they do not have housing support, they do not have the sort of wraparound supports that the refugees usually have, they do not have ongoing financial assistance payments, so they are basically, they have to be self-sustainable from day one. In June, the Government of Canada introduced the one-off payment, it's called transitional support payment of $3,000 per adult and $1,500 per minor. But other than that, it's the support from the community and their own savings, if they have any, that these people rely on. They have the expedited visa processing. They have a visa to stay in Canada for up to 3 years, and they have an open work permit. So naturally, most of them are very eager to sort of hit the ground running and start working from day one. What is happening in St. John? So far, we have received around 70 families who arrived under this program. In total, about 200 people. There are many more to come. A lot of the people are still waiting. There are currently travel restrictions for men of fighting age. So a lot of the families are waiting for those restrictions to be lifted, and they may come later. As a proxy estimate of people's interest, the Ukrainian Association of St. John is managing a social media platform, answering questions, giving people advice. So there are around, last time I checked, there were around 1,000 people potentially interested in moving to St. John. Now, of course, not all that 1,000 would end up here. There may be more, there may be less. So that's the interest is there. So the wave is still approaching. We are seeing the beginning of it so far, and the settlement sector is already putting in place many supports and programs available. The main actors on the settlement in the settlement ecosystem are the Ukrainian Association of St. John, the recently incorporated organization with the help of the city's ethnocultural communities grant. This organization is very active, and it mostly operates at the pre-arrival stage. So people that are potentially interested in moving to Canada, they would look for resources and they would sort of end up wherever there are very useful advice and resources, and that happens to be one of the platforms managed by the Ukrainian Association of St. John. Community connections and sort of introduction to the community from the Ukrainian perspective, that's what's important. Then there are more officially styled organizations like the St. John Newcomer Center and the YMCA Newcomer Connections. They have divided between themselves. The St. John Newcomer Center is a go-to place for the Ukrainians who arrive here, and then they do the needs analysis and they orientate them and refer them to other services, while the YMCA Newcomer Connections is more a go-to place for the Canadian community, for the local communities who would like to support and somehow participate in different initiatives related to the arriving Ukrainians. So those two organizations work in tandem. And of course, of prime importance is job matching and employment council. And so working and be a department of the provincial government plays a crucial part in that. All these organizations have already got the Ukrainian-speaking staff who are well-versed in the cultural specifics of Ukraine and are helping Ukrainians on the ground. The key priorities that are top of mind in most of the families arriving here, first of all, accommodation. The first accommodation on arrival, which is currently usually a volunteer-provided, hosted accommodation by the local community. There are already programs in the pipeline to make that official, to have people do the background checks before they host, etc., etc. Then, of course, employment, because people need to be self-sustainable. And the majority of people arriving here, they have higher education, as in bachelor's, master's degree, and the barriers that keep those smart and well-educated, hardworking people from getting jobs are usually the language barrier. Not many of them speak good English. The childcare, a lot of families arriving here, because they do not have childcare support, they have nowhere to leave their kids to go to work. And transport. Here, the city again provided very good support in free bus passes, free monthly bus passes for 12 months since the arrival of each and every Ukrainian in St. John. And the long-term prospects. So the final point that people really care about, the Ukrainians move into Europe, a lot of them move there to wait out and then get back to Ukraine after the war is over. The Ukrainians move into Canada, the majority of them would like to stay here. It's very expensive to move here just to wait this thing out and then go back. So really depending on how welcoming the communities are, those people would decide where and if they want to stay in those communities for good. And just finally, to put the figures into perspective, to compare the Ukrainian cohort with the Syrian refugees, we as in Canada had 45,000 Syrian refugees arriving here within the span of 5 years, while a Ukrainian cohort, we have 55,000 within the first 5 months already. So there is a real need for the entire settlement sector and the community to go into the overdrive for the next several months at least. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation and all the work that St. John Lip is doing to coordinate. So very much appreciated. Is there any questions for Valentin?
I just want to make a short comment. I think it's a great report. It's good to keep up to date on, how things are going. I noticed that, the priorities are obviously accommodation, and then language, childcare, and transport so that people are able to be employed. And as you say, Valentina, they're coming over with skill sets and education. I mean, it's not like there's a whole lot of challenges except language, really, because once the language is settled, then your childcare and your employment's easy going. But we did have a conversation the other day that I think is interesting because we talked about, the lack of housing, and we've got more people coming in, and the lack of employment. People, we're looking for people to work. And so to match those two up, we had a conversation around, how they have these mobile trailers, and you see them sometimes for the Irving turnaround out at the refinery. It's a short-term situation where they put, 400 or 500 of them out there, and they use them short-term. And we had this conversation that if you brought people in, you housed them short-term in a mobile home or a trailer, they get employment, or they go to school, they learn the language, then they move on to employment, then you bring more in. You're growing your population, you're filling your employment needs, and you're giving short-term housing for people until they can, get into a new building or a new home. And I thought it was a pretty good concept, actually, but something to think about. But anyway, thanks very much for the update. Appreciate it very much.
All right, so I'll take a motion to receive and file. Councillor Lowe, Deputy Mayor. Thank you on the question. Okay, all those in favor. I want to make a motion to actually table the development update to the next growth committee meeting, just in the interest of time, if I can get a seconder. Okay, to the river. Councillor Lowe, you're okay? Okay, on the question, all those in favor? All right, so and I'll take a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Lowe.